Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Miranda and I will be your Enchantress of Avalon, leading you on a journey into the lands mystical and into Avalon. So for today's video, I have decided that I would go ahead and talk about Guinevere. So I've mentioned her in a lot of videos. I've written a lot about her on my blog, whiteroseofavalon.life, but I haven't devoted a video to her yet, so I thought as I'm getting back into making videos, she was a perfect one to work into this new series of videos. So, Guinevere is one of the earliest figures in Arthurian literature and in Arthurian lore. She has been there pretty much from the beginning, from like even really early references that Arthur had a queen named Guinevere. And it's just throughout. Now, earlier references of her, we don't get a lot of information. She's just this figure. We have a name. We assume she was beautiful and we assume that she was beloved. But that's it. We don't know a lot. Then, as the Arthurian lore was really getting popular and as Arthurian literature was expanding, we get more and more tales of Guinevere and of this power she holds over the night and how just amazing everyone thinks she is. She's this very idealized figure who, of course, because she's idealized, has a downfall. I want to first note one of the most important things about Guinevere as a figure is that she fits in with the Celtic archetype of the flower bride. That is her first purpose as a figure in Arthurian lore, as she is Arthur's queen. She is his bride, and we come with most tales of her being said to have been the daughter of King Lodencrantz, who would have been a king of, most lore says Scotland, so I'll go with Scotland. So he was a king in his own right, making Guinevere a princess. She was literally raised to one day marry a king and become a queen. This was just who she was. And her flower bride thing, though, comes from the Celtic lore. And this is why I associate Guinevere so much with Avalon. I'm a huge Morgana fan. Guinevere is a very close second and favorite females in Arthurian literature. Favorite figures, actually, in all of Arthuriad. But she's not always associated with Avalon on a whole. Like the whole scale, a lot of people don't want to think of her as Avalonian. But being a flower bride, she's a fairy queen. She is someone who is marrying Arthur to cement his rule. Most kings need to get married at some point or another, and having a queen, having that possibility of siring future kings, having that cements your status. But in Celtic lore, we find it a lot in Celtic mythology, and of course the Arthurian legends are derived directly from it. It's more than that, especially for these kind of magical, godlike, for lack of a better term, kings. Their queens are flower brides. They are representatives of the goddess of sovereignty herself. They are sent to you to marry, and only by having a flower bride, having a queen, can you truly be a powerful king that you want to be. So it is my belief that if he was not married to Guinevere, Arthur couldn't be king. And in fact, the downfall of his marriage to Guinevere ended the Round Table, ended his kingship. He died. This is all tied up with his magic. And, you know, he's losing his magic by losing that connection to sovereignty. Sovereignty is, you know, kingship, but it's also, in Celtic lore, sovereignty is the land. It's that feminine connection. Sovereignty is always a goddess, and several goddesses are associated with sovereignty, and especially fairy queens are associated with sovereignty. So that's why we have that. Guinevere is his connection to being a king. Without her, he loses his right to rule, and his entire kingdom crumbles. So that is such an interesting way to look at it, and it's something that isn't talked about a lot. I feel like most people focus on the love triangle with Arthur and Lancelot, which it's fascinating. Everyone loves a good love triangle. I love it. I adore a good love triangle. But that's not all there is to this. Okay. Now I want to also move on to talking a little bit about Guinevere as related to some other famous female figures who were married for sovereignty. So, and giving sovereignty to their husbands. Straight up out of also the Welsh Celtic lore that we get the Arthurian legends from, we have the stories of Rhiannon and Blodeuwedd, who I've covered in previous videos. If you want to watch them, please do. But Rhiannon, to just recap her story, was a fairy queen who came into the human world, into Dyfed, which was an area of Wales, and she basically had fallen in love with this human prince and tells him so. Once he finally figures out that all he had to do to get her horse to stop was to ask her to wait. It was as simple as that. Instead of, exhausting all these horses and all his men and everything, he could have just asked her to wait. She stopped as soon as he asked. But again, he's a man. Let's go action instead of just simply asking. Anyway, they get married, and it is their marriage that cements the sovereignty of Poole, her husband, in Dyfed, and he becomes king. I'm not going to go further into that story because I just wanted to show that particular connection. Now, Blodeuwedd, she is a Welsh fairy queen who is literally created to be the wife of this prince, Lleu Llaw Gyfes, who then inherits the title of kingship and inherits full rulership of this land because he's now a married man, because he's married to Blodeuwedd. And she's literally sovereignty of the land because she very literally is made of the land. She's made of flowers. And another connection between Blodeuwedd and Guinevere is falling in love with another man. And Blodeuwedd actually plots with her lover to kill her husband so that they could be together. And that's, of course, a central fear that maybe Guinevere would plot with Lancelot to kill Arthur. And that's the central fear of the Guinevere and Lancelot relationship. Lancelot never wanted to be king, though, so that wouldn't come to pass. And then the final legendary figure I wanted to talk about was Melucine, or Melusina. She's called Melucine in the French romances and Melusina in German romances. She was a medieval fairy figure. She was a fairy woman who was cursed to spend every Saturday in the form of a mermaid. Sometimes she actually has the tail of a fish. Sometimes it's the tail of a serpent. But either way, it's this mermaid figure. And she was a lady of the fountain. That's how she met her husband, Raymond. And again, her marriage to him cemented his rulership. She actually built physical castles and palaces. So she's very intrinsically linked there. And she also has a very interesting link with banshees, which I would love to do a video with just Melucine's link to banshees, because I think that's super fascinating. But I just wanted to talk about her in that respect, is that, again, this is a sovereignty figure, a queen who is cementing rulership. Well, technically she was a duchess and he was a duke, but again, his leadership of that land was the main point. And then in a more real term, there's a connection to actual medieval queens who would kind of evoke this Guinevere-like energy and archetype to show the status of their husbands. And I think this is most exemplified with Elizabeth Woodville, who was one of my favorite queens. She's my second favorite after Anne Boleyn, who you could actually see. I have an ambulance figure right behind me. So Elizabeth Woodville was queen of Edward IV of England, and she married him as a commoner. She's really the first one to do this, but he chose her because she was beauty. She's this picture of loveliness, picture of what an ideal queen is, and she was incredibly fertile. Now, this is something that, of course, we don't see with Guinevere, as in accepting some of the earlier legends where it states that Arthur had a legitimate son, which we have to assume is Guinevere's child, who then died. I believe he died before he had adolescence. Again, tragic. But that story there actually does link up to Elizabeth Woodville's royal sons being the Princes in the Tower. The Princes in the Tower is a tragic story of these two young boys who were locked in the tower and ended up being killed after their father died. I don't have time to cover it. Again, I think that's another video in and of itself. Possibly tied into a royal hauntings at the Tower of London, because there's so much there as well. So, I have to say, to round out the end of this video, that a lot of the reasons that Guinevere is said to have become the lover of Lancelot is that she was feeling alienated and kind of forgotten by Arthur. He's focusing on everything else and ignoring his queen. And when a king ignores his queen, this woman that gave him the sovereignty through marrying him, and she feels lonely and wanting for attention, and there's these handsome, sexy young knights around, he's asking for his own downfall, which is really what happened. In a way, we can frame the Arthurian legends as what happens when men kind of disrespect the women in their lives. Because you disrespect Guinevere, your kingdom falls. This is the downfall of your kingdom. You disrespect Morgana, and she's gonna hex your ass. You disrespect the Lady of the Lake, and no Excalibur for you. You know, we could frame it that way too, which is sort of a fun way to think of it. So, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have enjoyed it, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, or a subscription. And please, if you love my content, go on over to my blog, whiteroseofavalon.life. I have so much more for you. Bye now.